Today I'm testing out the PC performance of Corsair Cove. Now this game comes out on the 31st, so I did get review access. Now my review's mostly on PC performance rather than the game itself, but I'll usually give some comments on, thoughts on the game as well. Now this is a pirate game, but don't be thinking gameplay like Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Instead be thinking city builder. This reminds me a lot of when I used to play like Tropico. I think I haven't looked too much into the development of the game, but I do actually believe some of the developers are behind some of the Tropico games as well, actually. So you build a pirate base. So this is like a city building type game. Where, I started out with a shipwreck down here, and I've built up this base since then. This is the result of, I don't know, I've probably been playing it about 8 hours or so. And I have found the, gameplay pretty addictive. Like, I meant to just play for an hour or two and then start my PC performance review, but then I was like, my base should probably get a little bigger to capture the performance, right? I just kind of kept playing and playing and playing. So now it's a day later, and I'm like, okay, I should actually do the PC performance review. So I am enjoying the game. Now, this is made with Unreal Engine 5, so that was one of my thoughts on the performance here, is this style of game might not be the type that everybody thinks might be challenging on a PC. Now, I'm actually starting out on a super high-end PC. This is a 5090 and a 9800X 3D, and while my performance is fine, I'm at around 90 FPS right now, this is max settings 4K, and I am below 100 FPS on a RTX 5090 in this kind of like city builder type of game. That is, I think, one of the things about Unreal Engine 5, right? Now, of course, I'll be testing this out on lower end hardware as well and adjusting graphic settings. I'm just starting out at its maximum possible, experience, and then we'll kind of go down from there. Now, I did try it out on my Steam Deck. I was hoping this would work okay on a Steam Deck. And it really didn't. Even at the lowest possible settings and using upscaling, I was below 30 FPS. Everything was blurry. It was hard to play. So I'd hoped that this might be the kind of game I could do on my Steam Deck, but really just kind of wasn't. Now, let's talk a little bit about some thoughts on the overall graphics and things like that on the high-end hardware before we then test out some lower systems. So one thing you'll see is that Unreal Engine 5 does allow this to, as you zoom in and get close to the base, like there is a pretty considerable amount of detail going on here. Now, you wouldn't really be looking at it this closely for actual gameplay. This is more just kind of for fun, but like my little pig dude drinking drinking his rum there and all that. So there's some kind of fun stuff here. By the way, just if you're kind of looking around at what's going on, notice all the zip lines and stuff. So I think what kind of sets this as a city builder a little bit apart gameplay-wise is that you can build up onto the cliff faces. So buildings can be placed on flat areas, but there's not a lot of flat areas. A lot of the buildings are built up on the cliffs themselves, so you can build kind of zip lines between them, and you think about like supply lines and things like that. Like you can see that this supply line for my bread here is coming pretty far, so it's kind of red and slow, so I could maybe improve my strategic positioning of all that. So that's one thing. Now, you will notice performance-wise that there can be some differences based on, this is how I'd kind of be zoomed out for most gameplay. But if I zoom in really close to look at things, you can see that performance does get a bit lower. I'm now at about 79 FPS, whereas out here, I'm at about 100 FPS if I'm zoomed far out. So typical gameplay, I'm probably looking more like this, where it's kind of more around 80 or so. But again, this is on a 5090. Now, performance-wise on the 5090, I found that, that, first of all, this kind of game, you don't really need that high of frame rates. But I did still go ahead and rely on DLSS quality to get over 100 FPS at max settings at 4K, but still on a 5090. So, like I said, it might be a little more demanding than you would expect necessarily at this kind of game. Also, let me just talk a little about some graphical stuff I noticed. So you can freely adjust the camera. Now, I want you to tell me, with the shadows, are you noticing something a little bit weird about the shadows right now? Because I'm noticing something kind of weird about the shadows right now. So as I move the model, let me pause the game for a second. As I move the model, the shadows move as if I'm turning like a model on a desk with a fixed light source, as opposed to turning a camera in a living world. In other words, the shadow position seems to be like there's a sun in a fixed position, but when I rotate the camera, I'm actually rotating the world relative to the sun, but the sun is staying in place. So that just feels weird to me. I don't think that that's like, I don't know, it's certainly unrealistic to how a camera rotating should work relative to the light. Also, despite this using Unreal Engine 5, which I think depending on how you use features like nanite and stuff like this, I still get some amount of pop-in as I move. So like right here, you can tell there's like if I look at this area and I kind of go in and out, you can see that there's some like pop-in there happening with the models, and model detail and shadows and things like that. Despite this being at max settings. So there's still some amount of pop-in and things. It doesn't really distract from the gameplay, but I was thinking, they're using Unreal Engine 5, and it's not the most performant thing in the world, so maybe we'd at least have no pop-in or something like that. That's not quite the case. Other thoughts, just if you're curious on gameplay and such, so you can zoom out, and there's actually like a world map where you can send ships out on missions to do quests. If you're hoping for big ship battles and things like that, I'll say that the battles are actually done more in like a turn-based card system with dice rolls. So it's not really like real-time combat or anything like that. So I think that'll be hit or miss for some people. Now, I know this is a bit more of a niche kind of gameplay. However, if you are interested in getting it, I did get mine through GamesPlanet, and I'm a GamesPlanet affiliate, and I do have a promo code Corsair Daniel, which will get you 33% off the game. This is a Steam key, and I reject working with most key selling sites because oftentimes they're gray markets where you're not sure everything's above the board, whereas GamesPlanet sources their keys directly from game publishers, so the people who make the game are actually getting paid for it, and there's no gray market or frankly illegal things happening regarding the game keys or anything like that. So you can get 33% off with promo code Corsair Daniel if you are interested in the game. This is not a sponsored review or anything, though. I want to be 100% clear on that. I do have the affiliate with the GamesPlanet if you're interested, but this is not like a sponsored, positive review of the game or anything like that. This is just one of my typical PC performance reviews. Anyway, so there's that. Overall, like I said, 5090, of course it performs okay, but I was maybe hoping for better and didn't run well on my Steam Deck. I didn't capture any footage, but it was not worth playing on a Steam Deck. Let's pop into more of a typical mid-range PC and see how things go. So starting it up on an RTX 3060 and Ryzen 5 5600X based system, one thing I'll mention is when you start the game, it will just ask you do you want to find the best graphics settings for the system and apply them. So I'll hit yes on that. So we'll start out with just the default experience based on what the game determines would match the hardware. Notice my CPU cores are all at 100% right now, but it doesn't say that there's shaders compiling right now. So in a lot of games, especially Unreal Engine 5, I noticed that whether or not they tell you they're pre-compiling shaders, they are. So notice that now these cores have dipped significantly, so I think we've completed the shader pre-compilation. So let's go ahead and take a look at what graphic settings is defaulted to. I'll also mention, so why did I choose an RTX 3060? It's still the most popular desktop GPU on Steam. Sometimes the 4060 laptop GPU beats it in overall popularity. And then like a 6-core CPU is also the top for typical Steam hardware survey. So this is kind of a typical Steam user build. I'm on a 1440p display, but we can use upscaling or test out 1080p if we want. So defaults here look like we defaulted to DLSS quality rather than native resolution, which on a 1440p display for the 3060 I think is reasonable. And it looks like we're at mostly medium settings. So it looks like we went with medium, other than mesh shadow level of detail looks like is at high. So that's the automatically determined graphic settings. Let's go ahead and pop into the actual gameplay and see how that goes. We can see CPU cores spike as we load into the map, which makes sense. I am curious actually on the CPU performance here, where we're going to be at with that, because this kind of game can be, it's very simulation heavy. So the CPU can be just as important or more important than the GPU as far as the overall performance that we get. Also looks like it might have kicked on VSync by default. Reminder to check the frame time graph to check for gameplay smoothness. If you're watching my video footage, it could look like it has motion judder or screen tearing because I capture on a second PC using an HDMI capture card at 60 FPS. But if I unlock the frame rate, then the gameplay doesn't match up to that, and it's not variable refresh rate on capturing or YouTube videos, so you could see screen tearing or motion judder. So definitely look at the frame time graph for overall judging the smoothness. All right, we are into the game. So let's go ahead and kind of get into the base here, see how things are going. Looks like we are definitely going below the 60 FPS. Also, I'll just turn off the VSync lock anyway, so if we go over 60 FPS that it allows us to. So turn off VSync, and we have no frame rate limiter. Double checking frame gen defaulted to off. Okay, so everything looks good here. I'm gonna go ahead and hit the average FPS result here, which shows up in the middle. The one over here is the 1% lows, and then this is the current frame rate. You can see the loading of all the CPU cores. It's 6-core, 12-thread CPU. So first, let's kind of just go into the base area, fly around the camera. Looks like we dip into, the upper 40s at times with that. If we zoom in, super close. Again, probably wouldn't do this much when actually playing the game, more just to admire what's happening. That's what we see. Okay, GPU usage is still seeming to mostly be the limiting factor. I was curious on the CPU, but right now I have things paused. I'm gonna go turn the gameplay up to 3x speed, which is the max speed, and I was curious what that would do. So we did momentarily see the GPU usage drop, which indicated it might have momentarily hit some CPU limitation, but now we're back to 99% GPU, so indicating that it is still the GPU limiting the performance here, not the 5600X CPU. So I do actually wonder if I go all the way down to performance mode DLSS, actually even ultra performance mode. My goal here is to reduce the burden on the GPU and see if we can shift the burden to where the CPU becomes the limiting factor to see how far the 5600X can go. If this doesn't work, I might put in a more powerful GPU with the same CPU to try to find the limits of the 5600X in this game. Okay, so we're now on to ultra performance mode upscaling. So I'm resetting the averages and such. Still looks for the most part like we are GPU limited though, rather than CPU limited. Although you can see we're getting pretty close on both because the CPU cores are nearly maxed out. So I don't think we'd have much more headroom than this, but it appears to still be mostly GPU limited as far as I can tell here. Okay, so I mean, this is not a game where you need a high frame rate to enjoy it. I certainly wouldn't want to be on this ultra performance mode upscaling for actual gameplay. I think quality or maybe balanced is about as far as I'd want to go for 1440p. So let's try 1440p balanced. Again, it's kind of defaulted to mostly medium settings. Seems like we're close to 60 FPS under, panning around, we dip into the 50s or so. Seems usable enough. I will say at these medium settings, the pop in on the shadows and such certainly does seem more noticeable than what we were seeing on the max settings. But how is combat? So let's see if any of my ships have arrived at a event location. So, okay, so I'm at a treasure cave. So I will show you guys what combat looks like in this game. So you can send ships out on events. And it's a bit more, so I'll reset frame rates for combat. But first of all, you don't need a high frame rate for combat because it is very clearly just like a turn-based kind of card system, sort of. So you see what the enemy is doing on this side. So they're going to attack with 1 to 4 damage to supplies. You can lose damage on like your ship health, your crew, or your supplies. Supplies are used to play your turns. And then it'll also deal 1 to 4 damage to crew. So then I have these options to choose from, and their effects are also based on a dice roll, and certain things that you do can get like more dice to roll on your turn, so that can boost those effects. You have various stats here along with your ship. Your ship stats are affected by the crew members that you get, and like back at your base, certain types of crew with higher stats require certain resources for upkeep, etc., that kind of thing. And the captain that you send on your ship also has certain bonuses and things like that. So that's a bit of how this side of the gameplay works. So each of these, the number on top is like how many supplies it will use to do this. So if this is going to attack my crew, I don't want to lose my crew. So do I have prevent? So this will prevent 3 to 6 damage to crew. The 3 to 6 is based on the dice roll. So that should most likely protect my crew and also gain some charts. So in this phase of the battle, I'm trying to gain charts because I'm charting out a treasure cove. If I was in a ship-to-ship battle, it might be more about doing damage to the enemy ship, that kind of thing. So anyway, so that's the idea here. So I got 9 out of 20 charts, and I protected my crew. They're going to deal damage to my crew, so I'm going to look for preventing damage to crew while I gain some charts. But again, these are costing supplies, so if you lose supplies too far, you can switch from battle actions to support actions, where these are more about gaining supplies back, but at the cost of taking some amount of damage. So that's generally how the mission-based gameplay works. So it's not like super exciting or anything. So far, it hasn't seemed particularly deep. It seems like usually there's like a best choice to make. I'm not really paying too much attention right now, but you kind of get the idea. So you can see there's these like sort of mildly animated background screens based on what you're doing. But performance-wise, and this is mostly a performance review, you can see that performance in these types of events is actually higher than the performance that you would get in the actual like city building gameplay. So in other words, from a performance standpoint, you don't really need to worry too much about the crew situation. The mission-based situation. It's more performant and it's kind of turn-based, so wouldn't worry too much about that. All right, I think I'm actually gonna switch hardware now. I wanna stay on this Ryzen 5 5600X and put in a higher end GPU so we can see what sort of CPU limitations we reach on this kind of, 5-year-old mid-range CPU that I think is similar to what a lot of people actually have in their systems. Hey, I noticed it actually does tell you it's compiling shaders right down here on that load screen. So it does give you warning. It's not just noticing the loaded CPU cores, so that's good. Anyway, this is still the Ryzen 5 5600X, but I've added in an RTX 4070 Super, which is more powerful than the 3060 we were using there. The idea here is to do still a somewhat realistic build rather than like pairing the 5090 with the 5600X, but seeing how CPU limited you might become on this type of a card. Just trying to see how much CPU limitations could happen here. Now, I am gonna auto-determine the best graphic settings for this system. I'm just curious what it defaults to. Looks like on this 4070 based system, I'm wondering if it's just leaving my most recent DLSS setting or if it really defaulted to this. Because remember on the 3060, it was defaulting to DLSS quality, but I'd been using that previously on my 5090. So anyway, I'm not sure if that's part of the default settings, but it looks like the default graphic settings went pretty much up to the maximum, other than mesh shadow level of detail was left at high rather than going up to very high. So this is at nearly maximum settings, but starting out with DLSS balanced, again, I have the display set to 1440p, and let's go ahead and load into the game and get an idea for performance on this CPU and GPU combo, because like I said, I'm interested to see what CPU limits we might hit. Okay, so I am seeing what I thought we might see, which is, notice my my GPU usage is in the 70-something% range. So this is indicating that the GPU is having to wait around for something else in the system. Now you could call it a CPU limitation. Now we don't see any particular CPU core at 100% right now, but sometimes it could be somewhere in like the cache or like the you know, RAM or whatever. The point is the GPU is certainly waiting around for the underlying platform, which is a 5600X and a, you know, 32 gigabytes of DDR4 memory. Let's go into the city here. We can see CPU usage certainly goes up into the 80-something% range. Now, this is still on pause for the actual city movement and stuff. So let's hit play on that. See if that has any impact. So yeah, we're certainly CPU limited right now. Again, GPU usage down in the 70 to 80% range. But the frame rate overall is around 70-ish, and the frame time graph doesn't look terrible or anything. I've got the averages going now as I kind of just pan around the city. So yeah, it looks like a, you know, Ryzen 5 5600X, you know, 5-year-old or 5 or 6-year-old, you know, mid-range CPU, 6-core, 12-thread, handles the game well enough. I don't think you need a high frame rate in this kind of game, so this certainly seems to be getting us at least, you know, 60 to 70 FPS. Now, my base certainly hasn't you know, spanned the entire island yet, and there's probably larger map sizes available and things like that. But this is, like I said, about 8 hours or so of building up a base, and, you know, panning around here, things seem okay. And like I said, this is at pretty much defaulting to max settings on the GPU side of things with that 4070 Super. So remember how to interpret this. The 4070 Super would be capable of even higher frame rates. It's just being held back by the underlying system. So if I was in this actual situation, if I was actually using this PC, I would back off on the resolution scaling, maybe actually even going up to using DLAA, so using native 1440p with high quality anti-aliasing, rather than resolution scaling. Let's see how it holds up here. So now we can see the GPU utilization is pretty much maxed out. So now we're seeing the limits of the 4070 Super GPU. So basically, at maximum settings 1440p, or nearly maximum settings 1440p, at native resolution using DLAA, which is a heavy but high quality native resolution anti-aliasing, we can see that we're around 60 FPS. So to max this game out on the GPU side of things at 1440p, it looks like about a 4070 Super level to hit around 60 FPS. Again, remember the screen tearing stuff here is a result of the capture not being locked to 60. Okay, so that's pretty much that. Now, if I scroll in and, you know, look closely at the details, actually still looks like we're holding pretty close to around 60 FPS or so, so not too much issues there or anything. On the VRAM side of things, nothing looks too crazy. Looks like we're well below 8 gigabytes of VRAM, so that doesn't seem to be an issue here at this time. So, all right, I think that's pretty good. I think the next thing I'd want to test before we finish up is what about a really low-end system? Actually, looking at the system requirements for the game, the minimum requirement is a GTX 1660 Super, which I don't have. However, I do actually think I still have a 1070 in my closet somewhere, which is very, very similar overall performance to a 1660 Super. So I think we'll try out the 1070 as like a minimum spec for the game and see how that runs. All right, we're on the GTX 1070. Now, I did get a warning about the drivers because the 1070, the 10 series NVIDIA cards, they get security updates now with the drivers, but they don't get like game-ready drivers. So it's potential that we could experience issues that are related to just the drivers being so old on this kind of card. But again, we're kind of testing what this is like on an older PC. So I'm going to auto-determine the graphics settings, and we'll see what we get. I still have the monitor set to 1440p, but of course we can turn down the rendering resolution and all that. Like I said, this is around equivalent to the minimum GPU on their system requirements, looking like it's trying to default to medium-ish settings. Although with the TSR, Unreal Engine 5 anti-aliasing, it can also be used for upscaling, looks like defaulting to the minimum screen resolution. So medium settings, but we're gonna be at very low rendering resolution. Let's go ahead and just load in and see how it looks and plays on these settings. Okay, so I mean, the first thing I notice is that at this low of a rendering resolution, things certainly look extremely blurry. So very, very blurry, which could even affect gameplay a bit. Frame rates, though, are, 40 something-ish, which I think for this type of game, I could play it at 40-ish FPS. Like, it's really, like, there's a lot of just kind of sitting at a fairly static looking scene, and you just kind of pan the camera a little bit. So I would consider the frame rate playable, but how blurry that is using TSR at that low of a render percent is my problem. Now, whoa, accidentally went beyond 100%. Didn't notice the slider works like that. So here, let's go to like 67%, 68% maybe to avoid memes, because that would be closer to, what you would think of as like quality level upscaling. However, using TSR rather than DLSS, because we're on a 10 series card, so no DLSS support, certainly not going to get the same level of image quality. Okay, this gets us to around 30-ish FPS. Now, remember, we are on trying to do a 1440p output, which may be a little bit too much. If we switch to a 1080p output, it might be a little bit more fair for this class of hardware. So let's find the 1920 by 1080 and see if we're doing any better at those settings. Okay, so we're at 1080p, but trying to be at 100% rendering resolution. And again, at kind of those default graphic settings, which came out at around medium. So yeah, it looks like this minimum type of GPU that they had on the system requirements seem to be for 30-ish FPS at 1080p medium settings, but certainly not locking to 30 FPS. If I bring this down to, let's try like 80% or so resolution. Let's see if we can at least stay over 30. Seems like we do stay closer to locking 30. It's not perfect. Now, a lot of games I would not even consider playing at 30 FPS, but if you're on a super old hardware and, it's an Unreal Engine 5 game, and this is not the kind of game where you actually need a very high frame rate to play it. This is certainly that. Now, I just realized everything's paused. Let's actually play at 3x speed. But it seems like performance stays about the same. So I think it's really the simulation work on the CPU that maybe goes up a bit as you get everything going into motion. So yeah, it seems like 30-ish FPS at upscaled 1080p output. Now, if we did turn everything down all the way to just, let's just do everything down to minimums. Oh, we can just turn off shadows. We can just really destroy the visual quality. But I'm guessing we will get quite a bit of performance out of it. I'll try to go back up to 100% resolution. So can we at least do native 1080p, but at minimum settings, see what that gets us. So yeah, you can tell the shadows and things are basically just gone, but we're back to around 40 or so FPS. So, I mean, there's a lot of scalability here to run the game on the lower end hardware, but you certainly lose a lot of the visual appeal. And I'm not chasing like amazing frame rates, but like I said, this is pretty old hardware and all that. So, all right, I think we've ran through a good number of kind of systems to get an idea for the overall feel of the game. Like I said, I'm enjoying it. I'm actually going to keep playing here. I've got that like one more turn kind of feel out of it for sure. So I will keep playing it. Hopefully you guys have some idea of how the PC performance looks on a variety of hardware now, and I hope you guys found the video useful and or interesting, and have an excellent day.